Hello, I'm Penny Thornton and I'm talking astrology. I'm going to be talking about the solar eclipse on the 30th of April, and I'm, of course, also going to be talking about the setting in which that is placed and what else is going on at the time. And there is indeed quite a lot going on at the time. Now, this may be what we call a partial solar eclipse, so the moon doesn't completely cover the surface of the sun, so it's blacked out, but it can still be a very spectacular thing. And if you happen to live in the Southeast Pacific, or you're on the very sort of tip of the south of South America, then you'll see it as well. You'll just see a sort of bit of a chunk, taken out of the sun. And it's still enormously significant when we see these eclipses, because it does sort of give us that feeling of awe that the ancients must have felt when they were observing the sky and perhaps initially not understanding why it suddenly became completely dark, or why these very strange phenomena were happening in the sky. Indeed, the ancients always considered eclipses to be more likely portents of doom, although they also saw them as in events such as the birth of a king or the winning of a great war. But so too was the death of a king and the loss of a great war, and in general, plague, pestilence, famine, all those kind of biblical things. And even though in this modern day we don't look at eclipses in quite the same way, and we certainly know what's going on in terms of what's happening astronomically, but even so, eclipses pack a powerful punch. And as I often say, they're change bringers, they're shifters of situations, and the events that cluster around them, not necessarily on the day, a little bit beforehand, a little bit after, are always a reference to that eclipse and the importance of those events and what they mean. So we can go back really to the middle of April period, the lead up to this solar eclipse at the end of it. And then we can go further forward into May. But of course, in May, we also have a total lunar eclipse, which I'm going to be talking about in my next video. And of course, that really is a mighty important thing. So this season of eclipses, as I often call them, is where lots of events constellate. They come together and they're either source of a great celebration and a great feeling of things having done or performed a great turn for the best. But they are equally as capable of being or placing their signature on events that are really, really very difficult, and we're not happy at all about them. Now, another aspect of this this solar eclipse is that, and this is if you're kind of interested in the more serious side of astrology, it's part of the Saros series 119. And translated, that means it's part of a particular family of eclipses, the first of which began in 850. That was a great long time ago. But it was also one that was present in 1914, just at the start of World War II. And so I think often these solar eclipses are significant of great global change. And of course, at the moment, as I record this, and I'm recording this at the beginning of April, so you can see that's a long time before this solar eclipse. And by that time, the events that we are witnessing right now, as I record the video, are going to have moved on considerably by the end of the month. But what I would say is that we watch, or we can observe what's been going on with the war in Ukraine, as we've seen these new moons, full moons, sort of mirroring extremely big developments in the course of that war. And I think certainly by the end of April, and certainly by the middle of May, we are really at a very, very crucial period, one way or the other. And in fact, these solar eclipses do impact both the chart of Russia and of Ukraine, and maybe I'll sort of talk about that in a little minute or two. There's another thing that I'd like to point out, and this is that the solar eclipse occurs, it's on a Saturday, and it occurs at the same time as a Venus-Jupiter conjunction, which is a really, really beautiful thing. And actually, through most of April, you can see Jupiter and Venus and Mars and Saturn in the pre-dawn sky. And of all those four lights, which will be in a slight diagonal line, Venus is the brightest because she's the nearest, of course. And we can see Venus in that pre-dawn sky right through until August. Jupiter will have shifted by then to the opposite side, and we'll be able to see that in the evening more. But it's always a good thing, just like witnessing a solar eclipse, watching these planets in their reality does sort of plug you into both the mystery and the majesty of astrology. And I really like to do that. So let's have a look at what this solar eclipse looks like in the context of what else is going on. As you can see from this chart, if we want to look for the solar eclipse, we can find it near the base of the vertical line, the sun and the moon close together at 10 degrees of 28, 29 of Taurus. Now, as you will also see, the sun and the moon are approaching Uranus. And in fact, on the day, the moon will conjoin Uranus a little bit later on. And it depends where you are in the world, or early in the morning of the 1st of May. So we can say that this solar eclipse is conjunct Uranus. So one of the things, of course, we've been seeing with these new moons is that they pick up Uranus every time to some degree. But here, this is really one of the strongest and most important connections to this planet with this solar eclipse. And we get things that happen suddenly and very unexpectedly, and they really change the order of things. Again, with Uranus, we get explosive events, whether we're looking at events that require fireworks, so it's a celebration on sticks, or else we get the idea there are explosions and earth movements and conflict and all those kind of things that we have to look at Uranus for as well. I said a little while ago that this configuration, Sun, Moon, Uranus, is on the midheaven of the chart of Russia, and at the opposite point, the IC, the Imum Coli, on the chart of Ukraine. And in fact, 2 weeks later, the lunar eclipse also picks up very significant parts of Russia's and Ukraine's chart. So we're going to see a lot of things really developing in that area, whether it's marking the end of the war and all the sort of, I's being dotted and the T's being crossed, or whether what we're seeing at this time is an even bigger escalation. We'll have to wait till we get there, but certainly there's a lot of change and shifts and developments and occurrences around this solar eclipse towards the end of the month. Now, this solar eclipse is also significant when we come to look at the Queen Elizabeth II's chart. And again, we look at her chart in 2 bites. We look at the solar eclipse of the 30th, about 10 days after her birthday. And we look at the second one coming on May the 16th. And again, it's the May the 16th lunar eclipse, total lunar eclipse, that packs a sort of more powerful punch. But I see these 2 things in a very curious way, because again, we're particularly looking at the Queen's midheaven. So this is here her role in life. It also affects the family and quite a few other things as well. And we are at an important period of her life where at the Platinum Jubilee, which is going to be celebrated in the early June period. We're going to have a special holiday for it, and it is a remarkable accomplishment that this reigning monarch has been on the throne for all these years, 70 years. My goodness, that's extraordinary. But of course, we're also witnessing Queen Elizabeth being a lot more vulnerable. She's got some problems with walking now, and although her mind is clear and she's still that wonderful, vibrant person we know and love, there are clear indications that life is more of a struggle for her than it ever was. And there may be something around this time of the solar eclipse and the lunar eclipse that refers to the future of the monarchy. Is it at this point, even though she has always said, I will never, ever abdicate, this is a life's work. She has dedicated her life to the country and the monarchy. This could be an exceptional circumstance where she does, in fact, decide to take a back seat, and we have some more formal acknowledgement of a coronation with Charles to come. So that is the sort of thing that we might expect from these very big and important eclipses, connecting certainly with the charts of the Queen and other members of the royal family. But as we look even more into this chart, if we go to the kind of 6 o'clock position here, we can see Venus and Jupiter. They're still, well, they're exactly together, and they will be together on that 30th of April. And of course, that's a weekend and it's a holiday in many parts of the world. And so a lot of people will have chosen this weekend for a special celebration, whether it's a marriage, a wedding, or whether it's a christening, or whether it's just some extraordinary get together, which everybody's celebrating. Remember, I talked about fireworks. And Venus and Jupiter, of course, are the essence of big love, of things done for love, in the name of love, and for inspiring a lot of love. And of course, both Venus and Jupiter are quite close to Neptune as well. The big Jupiter-Neptune conjunction having taken place just before Easter on the 12th, 11th, 12th, that period of April. And I've talked a lot about the Jupiter-Neptune conjunction inspiring outpourings of compassion and help and sacrifice and selflessness. And at the same time, you can point the finger at all the lies, the disinformation, the chaos, the confusion over things also lies in that Jupiter-Neptune conjunction. And of course, we're seeing this now as a kind of triple stellium. So on the one hand, we get divine love, we get this big love, as I just referred to it, but we can also get big losses at this time, in the sense of things being sort of out of control and not being able to, really predict the sort of things that are happening at this time, and that's sending our planning into the shredder and all sorts of chaos ensuing. Venus will be exactly conjunct Neptune a couple of days before the solar eclipse. In fact, I think that conjunction takes place on the 27th. And so again, even though I'm mentioning the exact date, because there's this what we call 8 degrees of orb, or 8 days roughly on either side of that exact conjunction, anything related to that can happen in the week before, right through until the end of the first week in May. Also significant in this run-up to the eclipse, one of the most important weeks of 2020-22, is the change of direction for Pluto. Now we can see Pluto in this horoscope sort of about the 8 o'clock position. And if you read along and look at the degree areas, 28 Capricorn, 38, you can see the little sign for retrograde on there. But in fact, Pluto has been stationary and only just turned retrograde a couple of days before the solar eclipse. And when Pluto is stationary, and you really need to give probably a couple of weeks on either side of this as well, for events of a Plutonic transformational nature. Remember, this is destructive creativity at work. In other words, we're getting rid of stuff in order to create more. So old things being put away in order for new things to take their place. But often when a planet is stationary, especially something like Pluto, which is quite a dark and difficult planet. Remember, Pluto was the lord of the underworld. So a lot of things are related to things that are happening in the underworld or happening in secret. And often things that come out at this time have been kept secret or are quite dark in nature. And so we see much more of that on a stationary Pluto. And remember, we have the eclipse following it. So this period of time is going to be revelatory on the one hand and revolutionary on the other. I want to also point out here in this chart the kind of nodes. If we look to where Uranus is in that sort of 4 o'clock position, next to it is the Omega sign. And if we go straight opposite it, we've got the Omega sign reversed. And this is the nodal axis, and eclipses can only take place on the nodal points. And as you can see quite clearly, here we have the nodal axis at 23 degrees of Taurus Scorpio. So if you know you have planets and points around this degree area, then this cycle, this mini season of eclipses is going to bring changes and big shifts in situations for you too. One last point before we move on. We can see Mars here again in that 6 o'clock position. It's at 11 degrees of Pisces here, and it is going to be moving towards Neptune. So we're not there yet. It'll probably take, well, I would say another, well, probably until the 4th, 5th of May before we start feeling that Mars-Neptune effect, which is again brings the misty tentacles of Neptune circulating around situations, creating smoke screens and all sorts of things that we can't be entirely sure about. But it's worth looking at this. And also, as I've mentioned in my Friday Bites a lot, this particular shaping that the planets are in, they're all in sort of one kind of third of the horoscopic circle, the zodiac circle, and we call that a bundle shaping in the trade. And that really means that it's a very intense and profound period. What's good is fantastic, what's bad is terrible. And it's the same with reactions. And I'm not saying this was solely to blame for Will Smith's outburst at the Oscars when he took a swipe at Chris Rock. But it will bring out extremes. And if we've been suppressing things or we've been trying to deal with situations and cope with them as best we can, if there is an incident which represents the last straw, this kind of configuration is likely to bring out a very extreme reaction in us, extreme anger, extreme despair, extreme, well, whatever, negativity you might want to think of. And of course, it's positivity as well, the sense of people really coming together in order to help other people. That's another expression in the extreme here. But it's worth noting, and if you can relate to this in your own life, then I think astrology is a very objective thing. We can look at what's going on and find our place within it and understand the processes. So we're not coming at situations blindly, just dodging bullets. We sort of know where, the lay of the land, so to speak, and we can, prepare ourselves in very good ways. So let's come back to me for a minute. And I think what I'm probably going to do now is sort of get into this solar eclipse and its meaning and effect, development in your different sun signs. But also it's the houses as well. And if you know where your houses are and where this solar eclipse is taking place, in which house, then it's that house that we're going to be interested in. I think it is very interesting that in the sign of Taurus, which is a very earthbound sign, and by that I'm not being insulting, what I'm saying, it is of the earth. That's why Taurians have green fingers, and that's why they're very good with construction and building, and they like things to take time and be durable. And there's also a Venus aspect to Taurus as well. So often we get things to do with sculpture, very tactile art. But I said this before, but it is surprising how many great, great ballerinas were born with the sun in Taurus. So off the top of my head, I'm thinking of Margot Fontaine, I'm thinking of Darcy Bussell, I'm thinking of many, many great dancers. So it's interesting, we get this artistic, musical, singing voice aspect to Taurus, as well as the green fingers and the solidity of the earth and the liking for things to be constant and consistent. So you can imagine we've got Uranus in the sign of Taurus right now, and Uranus loves nothing else but being iconoclastic, breaking up traditions, changing it up overnight, not giving us a nice warning, but just doing it. So a lot of Taurians are having to do U-turns and backflips and forward flips in order to accommodate things that they have no control over. And so we put the eclipse in this sign, and we've got those messages being sent anyway, though that's the constant meaning, if you like, but then it will vary into the houses of your natal chart or the sign you're in as to how best to prepare for it and what to expect. So, of course, with Taurus, sun in your sign at the moment, and the moon in your sign. New moon, new beginnings. So while this is a celebration, of course, because to have a new moon in your sign, especially if it's your birthday on the 30th, then this sort of sets a trend for much longer than just one day. Not only does it go 2 weeks ahead, but also if it's on the day, on your birthday, then that influence is cast all over the year, because that's your solar return, the sun coming back to itself. So the new moon, being a new chapter, is all about you personally. It's the most personal part of the horoscope, the first house. It actually has a lot to do with our appearance. So on a new moon, we may decide, what, I'm looking stale. I'm fed up of the way I look. And so changing your look is good. And of course, changing your image is very good. If you happen to be in a career where image is important, then changing your image is a very good thing to do, because it gives you a freshness and people look at you in a new and different way. But it's also time to get behind your personal ambitions, whatever they may be, and your desires. The new moon, in a way, is saying it's down to you. And using the power of the sun and the power of the moon together, you can influence things much more directly. So take action, Taurus, on those things that you wish to come to fruition. And of course, we've got Uranus in there as well. So maybe a few things are going to happen, not by accident so much as just happening. And you're then faced with looking in a new direction, or looking for new things to bring out in your personality and in yourself. If we go to the opposite sign, and so we're looking at Scorpio, the new moon, the solar eclipse, is in the 7th house of relating. So we've always got this idea of new beginnings. So, with a solar eclipse, then you've got that theme really playing long and loud. So, for instance, you may be one of those people getting married at this time, or becoming engaged, or deciding to move in with your significant other. Or it may be that you reach that point where you think, you know what, I need a new life, I need new things, and this relationship, if it can't be made over, if it can't have some fresh air brought into it, then you know what, that's it for me. So, and of course, as you know, this new moon, full moon, solar eclipse, total lunar eclipse are all on that kind of axis. Then the full moon, lunar eclipse, there's also a time of endings. But I like to think too of a solar eclipse being opportunities that come to you through other people. Other people offer you something, or they invite you to something, or they show you something that awakens you to all sorts of new possibilities. And I would absolutely say, and this is a general theme anyway, the people you meet on a solar eclipse, but the people you meet if you've got a solar eclipse in your 7th house, are definitely part of your destiny, and they are going to have a big impact on your life. It doesn't necessarily mean you met someone who you're going to, spend the rest of your life with. It can be someone who comes in the guise of a teacher, for instance, or presents you with a great contract or opportunities that enrich your life and change your direction in major ways. If we look at Leo, then this solar eclipse is in the 10th house. And, we've got a bit of a tune playing with you in that, you've got Saturn in your opposite sign. And that has been quite a struggle for many Leos. And of course, Uranus being square to that Saturn has meant it's often a series of things. When one thing happens, then another thing happens. And it seems as though you can never get to a state of equilibrium. So with this solar eclipse in your 10th house, and if you have Taurus on the cusp of your 10th house, then that's where the solar eclipse is. And this is to do with your place in the world, in the sense of you're out there in the world being. It can be your career. It can be your role in terms of being a parent or being, that we all have different roles we play in life, as well as the role we may have in our career. So that solar eclipse and being close to Uranus means changes. Now, it may mean it's just a change of location, for instance, or some other changes in the structure of where you work or how you work, or it could mark the end of a job, and a sudden end at that. And let's face it, we've seen some of that happening in this year with these new moons connected to Uranus. And I'm thinking particularly of the 800 employees of P&O Ferries who lost their job literally in a heartbeat, no warning, and in fact told about it on a virtual screen. I mean, that can happen with Uranus in tow to these new moons, and particularly with a solar eclipse. And so I think what we're looking at here, Leo, is being open to change and not resisting it, because it's pointless to resist. The only thing you can do is adapt and move forward. And ultimately, these things that are so inconvenient and sometimes upsetting at the time, we can see them as the means of which we end up in a much better position. So try to be philosophical about it, because the sooner you get with the changes that have come in, the easier it's going to be, and the sooner you'll get to where you need to be. So if we come to Aquarius, this solar eclipse is in the 4th house, home, family, the roots of life. So it's the kind of thing that can sort of really make big changes in your family. Now, does that mean that you've heard about things going on? Is a member of the family getting divorced, or is a member of the family getting married, or is there an unexpected pregnancy somewhere in the mix? Or is it more related to the four square walls that you live in, and it meaning that you have to move? Whether you're joyfully, moving home because it's the right time and you're looking forward to it, or whether because of circumstances you're being forced to make changes that you don't really want to make on the home front. And if you've been, and I mean, we all do this, don't we? We all think, oh, I don't want to do that. Let's wait and see what happens. And there's been a lot of let's wait and see going on for a while. But I think when you get a solar eclipse in Uranus, the writing isn't just on the wall, it's leaping right out at you. That change is inevitable and it must happen. And even if we're reluctant to move or we're reluctant to make changes at our home base, ultimately we benefit from them. And I think I've mentioned this when I've talked about new moons in the fourth house generally, is that our home base is so important to us. I mean, we spend a lot of time at home, and it's very easy just to take it all for granted. So, nothing changes much. But we start to move the furniture around, we start painting walls, we start doing all of that kind of stuff, and suddenly our home looks very different, and that adds newness and difference to us as well. And that's also an extremely good thing. If we come now to Pisces, now Pisces, this is interesting. It's not just a new moon in your third house of communication, but if you remember when we looked at the horoscope of that new moon, we could also see that we've got Venus and Jupiter and Neptune and Mars all in the sign of Pisces. So this is a terrifically busy, significant period of the year for you. I mean, Mars activates, it makes things happen, it gets things moving, but it can also aggravate. So there could be aggravating situations already that you're handling. But I think looking at that concentration of planets in your sign, you really can't grumble for not having the stars sort of urging you onward and upward, or as I often say, onward and starward. And the new moon in the third house is about new thinking. It's about throwing out those old ideas, those old beliefs, and those old ways of looking at things, and looking at the world, looking at your life, looking at certain situations with a new pair of eyes. And it may be that that is brought to you by an incident, a piece of information, a conversation, whatever it is that opens your eyes and you say, oh, epiphany, things are going to have to be very different. And of course, this is kind of a quite good astrological position because it means that new way of thinking, you can take up new things, you can adapt to new technology, you can purchase new technology and make it work for you, especially regarding communications and social media. So it has its good side. But on the other hand, what you will have to watch at this time is that you don't end up in an argy-bargy with someone, and therefore it's all over the shouting. It will be important to rein in your assertive Mars from time to time in order to make a good judgment when you're ready to make it and not in the heat of the moment. I also think we might be looking at a journey in the future, and one that's going to, again, open your eyes to new possibilities. And it's good to make journeys in knowledge, experience, and travel at this time, even if you've got to cope with Uranus, which is a little bit unpredictable. So if we come to your opposite side, so here we are, we're talking about Virgo. This solar eclipse is in the 9th house. And the 9th house isn't just about long haul travel, and it can be. So the solar eclipse may be about a long journey or the planning of a long journey. But it's a little bit more than that. It's about the long haul, the long term, the far reaching, the future forward areas of life. So that this solar eclipse, conjunct Uranus, can have a big effect on where you're going in life. Literally, travel on the one hand, where you're going in terms of where your trajectory is. So there could be things that happen at this time that change it. Maybe it opens up all sorts of new potential for you, lots of change and lots of things that will be good for you. But it could also be quite disruptive, because that's the nature of eclipses. They're change bringers, and they can sometimes be quite unsettling in the way they bring about change. So you'll have to be very, very philosophical about the events that happen around this time, not only in the way of saying, well, it's meant to be, but also in seeing what it opens up in terms of your long-term horizons. And that's the purpose of this solar eclipse. If we come now to Gemini, Taurus, of course, is your preceding sign. So this solar eclipse is taking place in your 12th house. And of course, if you've got Taurus ruling your 12th house, on the cusp of the 12th house, this is where this solar eclipse is. And the 12th house is the realm of the unconscious mind, the great sea of the unconscious. But it's also a very spiritual area. It's an area where we seek to transcend the limitations of our life. We seek a greater purpose, a kind of spiritual kind of purpose. And a solar eclipse here can be like, well, especially conjunct Uranus, the burning bush on the road to Damascus, your Damascus moment. This really makes you see your life in the context of a really much bigger picture. And you are inspired to look to ways in which to manifest those experiences that you're having on an internal spiritual level, to activate them and manifest them, rather than just letting them be awakenings in your own personal sphere. I also think sometimes this is a health axis as well. I'm going to be talking about that when it comes to Sagittarius, and that it can mean that solar eclipse will illuminate weaknesses in your health or aggravate health conditions or injuries, those things you're living with. So probably around that period of the 30th of April, it's probably good not to take a risk with life and limb. Don't do anything off the hoof. Maybe bungee jumping isn't a good plan with that solar eclipse. But if you've got a toothache, go get it seen to. That's the sort of nature of solar eclipses in that area. If we look at Sagittarius, and any of you that have this solar eclipse and Uranus in the 6th house, we are in the realm here of work, but it isn't quite the same as career, because work covers so much more than your place of work and the type of work you do. It's sort of the work of life. It's how we live, what we do to make our life work. We think of all those plays on that theme of work, you know, and life. So here, it may be, and so often in life, don't we? We say, you know, what's the meaning of all this? What's the purpose? What am I doing here? Why? And often we need to get a purpose. And in the 6th house, which is the realm of service, it's what we can do for others selflessly. It's in doing something for others that in turn makes us feel worthwhile. Right, I have a purpose. This is meaningful, and that's why I'm doing it. So this solar eclipse here might actually awaken you to something you need to be doing to add purpose and meaning to your life. But in the same way that I discussed it with your opposite sign in Gemini in the 12th house, you do need to watch your health, and also your body and injuries, whether they're old injuries that are likely to, you know, be a little bit more vulnerable to becoming worse on this, or whether it's just taking unnecessary risks, which then, you know, inconvenience you. And really the same with general health. When there's a solar eclipse, if there's something that you start to worry about in terms of your health, then don't just sit there and worry. take it to the professionals, get it seen to. The sooner the better. Remember, there is an aspect of awakening and illumination, enlightenment, with this solar eclipse being conjunct Uranus. So my final group, the cardinals, and we're going to go to Aries first of all. Of course, Taurus is your zodiac neighbor. And when we look at where it is in your solar chart, we're looking at the second house. And if you have Taurus on the cusp of house 2, then this solar eclipse conjunct Uranus is taking place there. So this is the area of self-worth. And that is not just about money and possessions, how much you're worth on paper, but also how much you're worth in terms of you as a person. And it is terribly important to feel full of value. And when we do feel full of value, anything's possible. And we certainly get a better result from our efforts when we feel full of value, because we're beaming that out at people who may employ us, or people who we may be mixing with, dating, whatever, and being full of value. Knowing that, feeling it, is just something that other people pick up too, and they treat you accordingly. So a solar eclipse here on Uranus could mean, in a kind of mundane, practical way, there's a change of income coming. Maybe there's a new source of income, unexpected, and maybe a source of income from a very different kind of area. You wouldn't normally expect that to be in your frame of reference. So it's an opportunity coming from an unexpected direction in a field you may know nothing about. But it can be the reverse as well, and so that you end up with the loss of income suddenly. And of course, that puts you in a position where you really need to rethink your whole financial world and see how you're going to make accommodations for this. Something will probably come up quite quickly in the wake of a loss, by the way. And I'm saying this not just because of the nature of Uranus to be so sudden and quick, but also because Jupiter is going to enter your sign on May the 10th, 11th. And that's going to expand your life in many directions. So if you are fortunate enough to have a bit of a financial blow at this time, remember, this is not over, because Jupiter is coming on side very soon. If we also think about that idea of self-worth, that in relationships, if we allow people to mess us around and not give us full value, it's really our fault. And so a rebooting on that solar eclipse conjunct Uranus of our self-worth is going to be well overdue. So if we come now to Libra, the solar eclipse is in your 8th house, and we still have a theme going on here with finances and worth and possessions and values. But it's slightly different, because here is where we share our wealth with other people, and we share financial relationships with others. So that means banks, lending institutions, credit card companies, and partners, business partners, life partners. So it's all about the joint effect of this solar eclipse on shared financial dealings. So there may be a sudden rupture in a contract. Maybe, you've been expecting a contract to go on for a while, and now suddenly, whoops, no, it is no more. And of course, we can have contracts for all sorts of reasons. We have contracts with electrical companies, mortgages are a contract. And so changes here could be significant in that they do come from the organizations that we work for. And this, of course, could be, quite significant. And of course, we get things like settlements and inheritances in this area. So unexpected gifts of money, unexpected bonuses. And of course, that can be welcome. But of course, sometimes there's controversy around finances when you have the solar eclipse in your 8th house. It's not a smooth running situation. It's abrasive, and it causes controversy. if we come now to Cancer, the solar eclipse in your 11th house is a very interesting house here, because it does have a lot to do with the way you mix with other people in groups. It's very entrepreneurial, and it's also very humanitarian, this area. So this new moon solar eclipse conjunct Uranus awakens your humanitarian spirit. And so this might be something that you get involved with. You start working for an organization, or you devote yourself for some time to organizations of a humanitarian nature. But of course, it can be you personally, in that you feel that aspects of your life aren't giving you what you really want. You don't feel you're living a healthy life. You don't feel as though the way you're running your life is conducive to the way humanity is going, and you might want to change your lifestyle or aspects of your existence. And so this is a kind of wake-up call, not necessarily to do with climate change, but it could play in there. But it's more about, what can I do to find, that way of living? And in a way, it's a sort of collective thing as well. So you may join groups, or there may be team, things where people come together with a specific purpose, or it may be an opportunity to start your own business. I mean, this, as I said, is the group entrepreneurial area of the horoscope. But as much as Uranus can bring things about in unexpected ways, Uranus can also end them. So there could be tensions within entrepreneurial ventures. There could be problems with backers or with your team members or people who you work with together, disruptions, upsets. You're a very patient sign, Cancer, and you're very, you're consistent and persistent. But, sometimes you do yourself a disservice by hanging on to things that really don't need to be hung on to anymore. And so if you've got an opportunity to break the ties that bind in the sense of a group rather than one-on-one, that's going to be appropriate. Finally, we come to Capricorn, and this solar eclipse in your 5th house, the creative center of the horoscope. So a new creative venture and a creative stirring, inspiration. So, if you already work as an artist or in a creative field, my goodness, this is going to knock your socks off. You're going to be brimful of new ideas and new ways to do things. But it's also creative and procreative. So we get the idea of love affairs, and we get the idea of pregnancy. These two things not necessarily mutually exclusive. So there could be some unexpected developments linked to pregnancy and linked to offspring. If you already have offspring, then this is still their area of the chart quite directly. So there could be some surprise news or some surprise developments linked to them. But I also think if we look at Uranus from that higher perspective as representing higher consciousness, the higher self, the upper octave of the sun, then the solar eclipse conjunct Uranus says, look, there is a whole new identity waiting to be born, and your higher self engaged much more in the activities you're doing, and indeed in daily life and your relationships, all the things that constitute life. But yes, there could be disruptions in a love affair. And, I often do this kind of 6-month cycle thing with new moons and full moons. So it may be that if, sort of 6 or 7 months ago, you started a love affair, it may be that we're looking at some things that are going on with it now, whether that's the birth, solar eclipse conjunct Uranus, of a whole new stage of that love affair, or whether it's, it's done, broken very quickly. So all this area of the 5th house, focusing on creativity for you, Capricorn, is a really big field. But I would say, if I say nothing else, but it is an opportunity to really do something very different, of a creative nature, or using your creative mind to create some aspect of difference in your life generally. So I think that's taken us all through those 12 signs. And I want to, well, I'm doing my little conclusion now. And I think, as you know, I've talked a lot about the idea of, awakenings and, epiphanies with this solar eclipse, because it's conjunct Uranus, just as a general theme, and just a lot of shifts and changes in situations globally, individually. And it made me think of something that I sometimes talk about in my columns and in my writings generally. And this is the idea of the wave of life, this endless cycle of beginnings and endings. But it's also a cycle of, let's say, not destitution, but this idea of desolation, maybe, to consolation, which is an idea given forth by St. Ignatius, who talks about desolation to consolation, the endless flow of life, that when one is distant from God and those things that are rich in spirituality, we're in a dark period. But as we move towards God, as we allow our spirit to open and connect, we're moving towards constellation, which is a nice spiritual way of looking at the new moon, full moon cycle and its ebbs and flows. But I would also like to think really of this idea of, the parts of life where we're rich and feel joy and fulfillment. We're at a kind of peak of everything going well for us. Well, that is never sustainable. And of course, we will move down to a period where we feel we've lost things, we've lost the momentum, we have failed, we are in a period of our lives when nothing works, and we feel lonely and unsupported. Where have the angels gone? Where are my guardians? Why have they deserted me? But it's this endless cycle, desolation to consolation, new chapters coming from the ending of old chapters. What goes up must come down. That's the same endless cycle of events. And I think if we could just accept that and get used to the idea, nothing is stagnant, nothing stays the same forever. And when you are at your lowest point ever, that's when you begin to go up. And when you are at the peak of happiness, that's the point at which you may face the downward cycle, but live it to the full, humbly. And what goes up must come down, and what goes down must always come up. So thank you for watching, and I look forward to speaking to you on my next video. And bye for now. Take care.